Alright, so took a pretty long break, thought about things for a long time. Tried to look into stuff and kind of not technically educated enough to really say much. I could just point out some observations pretty much that look like they might be important. I could do some things that might provide some explanation to some people about some things that happen, and just using this unique setup to kind of give people a better idea about how things get linked. I don't know how far I'm going to get. For what I could tell, I'm not sure what's exactly going on. There may be an issue with my make. I am just bleh. It is. I did struggle with the make file, but I'm just at a loss as to why. I never heard of the linker having an option to not define a few symbols here and there. I don't know why that would happen. But I'm not an expert. I'm certainly not an expert on linking. I'm not an expert on compiling. And certainly I might learn something from all this. And I'll just look over, mention some things that I have no real skill at all to talk about. But getting right access to the system has led me to have more understanding by experimenting. It's kind of the way I learn. Some of the technical writing out there, you just look at it. Unless you know some certain background things, or you understand the context and you've done certain things before, it doesn't make any sense to you. Even though later on when you read it, it makes perfect sense. It's a matter of what you know already. But getting back to this, so the last thing I did is I tried to open up a program that comes with Haiku. It's a demo program. It's called GLTpot. And when I did, two different things happened, and I'll do those two things again. And they're interesting. So they kind of point out, they're good examples to point out some things that the mechanics of the way things link in certain, not in the nitty-gritty details, but when they run, when the programs run. So not the linking process itself. So let's just go over here to the demo, and I'm going to open up this GLTpot, and right, it tells me cannot open, GLTpot missing the symbol GL new list. Now, review. I've replaced the Mesa libraries that came stock with Haiku with my own that I've built, and I've done this so I could see if things react differently, and this is reacting differently. And once if I see something reacts differently, I could try to figure out why it's reacting differently, and that might lead to more answers and more knowledge, at least for me being able to do this. And maybe for other people. So I'll discuss all this. Now, that's not the only error that the GLTpot actually brings up under the circumstances in which I've replaced the Mesa library. So I'm gonna do one thing. I'm not gonna show it just yet. It won't take that long, and then I'll show what I've done, and I'll show. And then it'll make things a little bit clearer about linking and how linking kind of works after it's linked. Okay. So going back to this GLT pot, now when I try to open it, it says that it's looking for library X11 and library XEXT. You say, well, what's that all about? GLT pot wasn't built with library X11 or library XEXT. And, to make this very clear, I am not claiming that it was built with those libraries. It hasn't. It absolutely has not. So what exactly is going on? Okay, so I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to change this right here to this library. I'm going to go back to the GLT pot. And I'm going to run it. Now it doesn't give me that error. It says it's looking for the GL new list. So what's going on? Alright, so why is that happening, and why did the error change? Because I just changed the name of a directory, and what does that have to do with boot home package library, and what does that have to do with anything? The Mesa libraries that I built in package source have, if you run a readelf on them, and I'll do that. I'll do readelf -d, which is like a short version of showing everything. Remember, I've copied it. I have write access to boot system library, and I've replaced the library GL that comes with Haiku. And of course, I actually have to go into the library directory and then select the right library. Okay. Alright, let's look at the output of this. This is what I've actually built in package source. I've now placed it in my system library. And what readelf -d says that indeed that this library GL wants to use library X11, library XEXT, standard C++, library root, and it's got a shared object name of library GL, and it expects to be housed in boot home package library. Okay, so I've skipped a step. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually open up another terminal, and I'm going to do a readelf on the GLT pot to see what's it calling up, what's it want to use. You might just assume it's using library GL, but let's see how it actually gets there. And we'll talk about how it gets there and a little bit of the mechanics that take place. So the library, the GLT pots and boot system demos, I believe. Was it capital D? Yeah. Gotta look. Lowercase d. Of course. Alright, so now I'm going to do a readelf on that. -d. Okay, so there's several interesting things that are taking place here, and some of which I haven't really, I may never have a full understanding of why things are the way they are. We'll just go the same. D just says what shared libraries it wants to use. First thing that stood out for me, and has nothing to do with the error that I'm having now. Completely, it's somewhat of a different subject, it may be related, is that when the GLT pot runs, it actually wants to look for the for a library SUP C++ in Home Builder Builds Haiku Nightlies. Now, if you're not familiar with Haiku or BOS, I'll just tell you that that directory does not exist. And unless a symbolic link for home exists somewhere, which I doubt, we'll just try it. Yeah, doesn't exist. When the program runs, it's not going to find that. But that's not a problem. You know, under normal circumstances, I'll say right now, the GLT pot runs without a problem, even though that link's in there. So instead of it being germane to the error I'm now having, which has been caused by me, I'll say that, it is just may or may not be a clue as to other things related to the overall problem I'm having. So it's pretty clear that the nightlies aren't built in Haiku, or at least the Haiku that you and I are familiar with, the Haiku that has a file system that the root directory is boot, and you can't do anything about that, as far as I know. You may be able to call it something else, but I really doubt that if someone was building the Haiku nightlies, that they would change the root from boot to home, if it was even possible, just for the nightlies. There's nothing about this as it relates to functionality in Haiku necessitates someone to change the root directory to home. What this really tells me is that we're probably building the nightlies in Linux. Okay, so what does that have to do with anything? It tells me that perhaps that when we build this teapot, we've decided we have to link this teapot with these two files in Linux, because when we link it outside of Linux, using cross-compiler methods, and then when we link it outside of Linux, it doesn't work right. That's kind of like, it's a theory and implication that I have that may be going on. On the other hand, it could just simply be some mistake. I mean, there's a lot of programs that are being built on a nightly basis, and this just may be one thing that it doesn't really matter whether they use the library GL that's in Home Builder builds Haiku nightlies blah 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 versus a library GL that's local. I'm just saying that it's possible that could be the case, that they have to actually link it in Linux, or they cannot link it in Haiku. And I'm also assuming, and I don't even know how that would work, I mean, how could some of the libraries be in Haiku and some of the libraries be housed in Linux? So it doesn't, I'm not so sure. This may be that if someone thought it was important, everybody has limited time, so this may be completely benign, or not really worth doing anything about at this stage. I completely understand that. Also, since I'm not an expert, I can't judge that, and I'm not going to say I'm able to judge that when I'm not able to judge that. Okay, so that's part, but let's look at this. So when the teapot runs, getting back to the actual issue at hand, when the teapot, remember what was happening. The teapot would run and to reconstruct things based on the evidence that I have. In fact, I probably should have showed you the contents of this library directory. It's basically a bunch of X11 libraries I built in package stores. When we look at the library GL that I now have housed in boot system library, run a readelf on it, what you'll end up finding is that it wants to find library X11 and library XEXT. In turn, if I were to run a readelf, and I'll spare everybody the time, on all the other libraries that are in boot home package library, no, sorry. If I were to run a readelf on the library X11 and the library EXT, eventually I'd find out that those libraries want to actually use the other libraries that are in boot home package library, and I would find that there's actually a path embedded in my Mesa library that wants to look for libraries in boot home package library. So what was happening in my case? I was trying to build games, and between the compiler, I was trying to build, let's see, Foo Billiards and Billiard GL. And Foo Billiards is probably a better example. So, with whatever compile tool set that was used to build Foo Billiard inside a package source, which is, I'm not in that setup right now to look, and it's academic. The point is that some of the tool sets, no matter what you do with package source, whether you include a build link or not for Mesa library or library glue or library glut, it doesn't mean that when the linking takes place in the make file that it's going to use the libraries that are copied into the build link. A lot of the time it will, and in fact that did work for ScumVM. But when it came to Foo Billiard, at least the first time I did it, it didn't link with the library GL that I had built. So then when I tried to run it, I had an undefined reference. But as soon as I brought over the library GL from boot system library and I put it into boot home package library, the directory that was embedded in the Foo Billiard binary as to where to find the proper library to run the program was going to look, then it ran okay, because that version of library GL or GLU or GLUT or whatever the hell it was had the symbols that Foo Billiard was looking for, because it was the same library that Foo Billiard had actually linked to. So the embedded path inside the binary prevented it from using the library that it had linked to. Conversely, the compiling tool set prevented Foo Billiard from being built with a library that it was intended to be built with, and that was the library that I had built in package source. The end result was a broken package. Well, that doesn't just happen in interior systems, that can happen across systems. Someone could build some programs, say in BOS, upload them to HaikuWare, and then someone comes from Haiku and tries to run it in their system, and if there are differences in the symbols between what's in Haiku and what's in whatever BOS environment that person had built the package in, there's a chance that there's going to be an unresolved symbol, and if there's enough of them, then people end up calling the software crapware. Really, in all reality, as a part of the overall thing, I mean, there are other issues that take place, at least at this stage, like not having write access or the disappearance of the common directory. Those are all other, still additional issues that could throw into the mix as to the reason why the packages that are up at HaikuWare aren't working now. But one reason is differences in symbols. If the person even built that package in Haiku, but they managed to link it against their own Mesa library that they had built, okay, that has different symbols, or ends up having different symbols than the Mesa library that comes stock with Haiku, and they managed to run it in their system against that library, but then when someone else runs it and they don't have the Mesa library that this guy built, then it's not going to run right in the other Haiku, because of the symbols, and not merely because the libraries are there or not. So, getting back to all this and just running through the whole thing with the GLT pot. The GLT pot first calls, as we can see here by the readelf, it calls library GLU, amongst other things, library game, and the absence of library game, I don't think ends up being a problem. It probably could have a, anyway, let's not get into that too much. Maybe I could massage this into actually working, getting to the point where it works. Okay. Let me check on time, because I actually, these files are getting huge, and I have a 2 gigabyte limit. I'm already close to a gigabyte of video here. So, it's calling library GLU. Now the question is library GLU the library that provides or is supposed to provide the missing symbol GL new list? Or, like as I showed with this chain of library X11s, right, all these ended up being issues. Like for example, if I were to remove everything but library XEXT and library X11, now we're going to see it's not going to complain about library X11, but it's going to complain about library XCB, library XAU, and library XDMP. Why is that? The reason is because the library Mesa that I built has library X11 linked into it and not library translation or library game or anything like that. So it may not be that library GLU is the culprit. It could be that some other library is the culprit. Perhaps not. So, first of all, we know what the error is. So let's see. I'm going to go back. These are my libraries. They're in boot system library now, the ones that I built. I'm going to do a readelf minus A, and then I'm going to do this library GLU .so. I'm going to grep GL new list. It's not there. Well, that must be it. We must be done, right? Right? It's not there. See, if it had it, it wouldn't be missing, right? We're done. No, we're not done. We're not done. Let's check and see whether the original Haiku libraries that I've set aside and library GLU.so, let's see whether that has GL new list, or do we need to run a readelf on library GLU to see what else it wants to look for, and then do a readelf on those and see whether they have anything about library GL list in the original libraries or the new libraries. So these are the originals. I've set them aside before I replaced them. First of all, there's no such file or directory, but probably if I put a little dot here, yeah, it doesn't have it. That's where things can kind of go wrong. Things aren't really clear, right? You think you fixed it, or you can go report back. Or I can't repeat the issue. So it takes a little more careful study. Okay, so now let's look. Let's go back to boot system library. Well, let's actually do a readelf on the original and see what it's trying. Readelf minus D on this original here, and see what it's trying to pull up. it's saying the shared, it's standard C++ root. Now it wants its library path to be somewhere where Haiku Porter wants it, which could be problematic. But it's also looking at library GL. Let's do a readelf, fancy readelf minus a against library GL dot so. And by golly, there's two of them. There's your GL new list. Okay, so obviously I created a crap. I did something dumb with Mesa, right? Obviously I've created crapware, and I shouldn't be doing this. Only have 6 months. Well, it doesn't take a lot of experience to type make install, and that's what I did. So, besides passing, in fact, I don't think. Well, that's the Mesa libraries. Yeah, actually, I didn't pass any variables. I didn't patch anything to get rid of a GL new list definition at all. In fact, the definition is actually inside the source. Well, I know you say that, Jamie. You must. Okay, let's take a look at the version of Mesa that I have, the library GL that I have in boot system library. And my God, there's actually stuff about GL new list inside my binary, my library. So why is it erroring out? Well, you got the library X11 in there, and it never intended to run. Well, yeah, that could be true. That may or may not be true. But there's one thing that stands out about the output from readelf, with the one that came stock with the system and the one that I built. Number one, I could tell there's 4 different lines here. I don't know why there are 4 different lines here. I don't really necessarily know what the lines mean. I really don't necessarily know what these things mean. But I did look this up. It's got UND, and that UND is actually an undefined reference. That's weird. All I did is compile the source code, linked it, and when it linked it, it actually created an undefined reference. What's that all about? And actually, that's still my question. What is it all about? I don't know. There were discussions about weak symbols on a mailing list, and it looks like there was a lot of thought put into it. And that there's some tough choices that need to be made. And and imagine. Let's just look at the output from readelf for any binary, and that is huge. Now imagine if you were charged with having to program, that's 14,000 lines. Imagine if you were charged to program something that was supposed to take a bunch of files, object files, put them together, making executable, and sort through thousands of variables, and to pick and choose what was defined and what was undefined. Imagine if you had to program that. That takes a lot of skill and a lot of time and a lot of intelligence and a lot of careful thought. And for every indication that I could have is that careful thought has been, as little as I know, it does appear that the people working on this have really carefully tried to get this sorted out. but okay. So set that aside. But at the end of the day, what it looks like, preliminarily at least for my situation, is that this output for my library GL doesn't work. It won't allow programs to actually use, I assume these are symbols, the symbols that are in it for some reason. And getting back to the readelf I did on library GLU that was linked to library GL, and that it was housed in Linux, that I'm starting to get the idea that there's something going on, and the only way to build library GL and get it to link right, perhaps, this is what I believe now, I could be wrong, is that it's built in Linux. But that could be wrong. It could be I just, need to add some compiler option to the makefile for Mesa. And I didn't do that or something. Certainly the entire body of my library GL is not completely 100% undefined. There are functions that are defined, but it's not the majority. It is absolutely the minority of all these things on the right here are functions, I gather. How does it relate to code, and what can I do differently to get it to build? I have no idea. I haven't gotten that far. Don't know if we'll ever get that far. I don't know if I have the skill to deal with it. So what's the bottom line if you're just someone that wants to be able to compile stuff and use package sources as your tool set? And or Haiku Porter. How does this relate to anything? How does this relate to some of the frustration end users have had and developers have had? And the crosstalk between the end users and the developers. Let's see, how much more time do I have? A little bit. I think this is such a low-level detail that no one looks at this kind of stuff first off. But it leaves people frustrated, at least as an end result. It leaves the people that are trying to solve the problem frustrated. It leaves the people that are trying to use the stuff right. Everybody's frustrated. Everybody's, at ends with each other, but at the end of the day, does it really, you to say, oh, it's someone's fault? No, not really. Everybody's trying their best. And, but because we have some of these difficulties, as an end user, I'm going to want to link with one library or the other. I'm not going to want to link. I'm not going to have. I do not want to have variations of libraries on my system. I want to have the same libraries in Haiku as I have in package source, and the package source is going to keep changing. And in Haiku ports, what are they going to tell you? Oh no, you don't make that recipe because that's not exactly, no one says that. It's not exactly, we have recipes for several versions of Mesa. I'm not saying that's bad, but if it has the same linking problem, if I'm right, then people that build stuff on top of that Mesa, they won't work. They'll get the unresolved symbol. All right, so let's just here. So here's the original library GL, I believe. And there, this is not exactly straightforward either. The library GL that I'm using is wanting to look in boot home package library, and if GLU wants to call GL, then maybe I ought to have the original library GL in here in boot home package library, and let's see what happens. Now, why did that happen? Why didn't that work? Well, there must be a part of that binary that actually wants to look in boot system library. When it calls, let's go back and see what's, or maybe the runtime loader by default is going to look at boot system library. Wonder what would happen if I placed that same library GL in boot home config non-packaged and library. Would I get the same error? I get a different error. Now it's got another missing symbol. It's a dispatch stub. Okay. Maybe I need to have library glue in there too, of the original, right? I prefer glutton error. I know from experience if you put stuff in this directory, it seems that the system will prefer to use this directory over what is in boot system library. And there you go. That may be calling other things later on. If I were to move all the original Haiku libraries into boot home config non-packaged library, that setting would probably, or hopefully, go away. It still seems to have some issues here. It's probably because library translation isn't there and it's gone. So let's I could do more readelfs on it, but I seem to remember that it wants to use library translation. Where is it? I should stop right now before I lose this whole thing.